President Trump authorizes an attack on Iran to destroy its nuclear facilities. After decades of terrorism on the part of Iran and its proxies, and constant attacks on Israel, Israel finally strikes back directly at Iran, targeting key regime figures and their nuclear program. You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. Mensch-Kight Geopolitics is your home for conservative commentary on international affairs with an eye toward Israel and the Middle East. I'm your host, Isaac Kite, your lovable landsman, your gregarious Vulcan, your mad genius, your shadow president, and your prophet of things to come. Welcome back, Mention and Insiders. Wonderful episode for you today. I timed this just right. I was planning to record this a couple days ago, and then we had the U.S. bombing of Iran nuclear facilities today, so I am able to bring you a broader perspective, a bigger show. You know, this is awesome. I had a lovely Shabbat, and then I saw the news as the sun was setting, and it was just a beautiful event, beautiful time. Got in touch with a number of my friends. We've been reveling about it. My kids are super excited. They love this military technology and all that. So just a great time. But it seems that today, as I'm recording this, it's the evening. A number of B-2 bombers. People have been 6 to 8. But number of B-2 bombers flew over to Iran and dropped the GBU-57 MOP, the massive ordnance penetrator, the big bunker buster bomb on the Fordow nuclear site, finally destroyed. It's the one that's up in the mountain. It's deep underground. These were the only kinds of bombs that could reach it. The U.S. is the only country with this capability, and it's just an awesome attack. And there were a number of Tomahawk cruise missiles. They're saying 30 that were fired into Iran by U.S. submarines, among others. So as a former submariner, I'm very pleased about that. So there will be a number of boats returning to port over the coming months with a broom attached to the periscope, as is submarine tradition, to indicate a clean sweep, much as they did on the war patrols in the Pacific during the Second World War. A heady time for submarines, although we took a lot of losses back then. Today, just as I had been saying on X, if you follow the account on X, if you don't, please go do. Go follow Mensch-Kight Geopolitics so you can stay up to date. That as I noted there, we have an opportunity here for submariners to get involved in the action. So just a great moment, attacking various Iranian nuclear sites. And I've been saying, this is a perfect opportunity for the U.S. to get in there and attack these nuclear sites with minimal risk to us, right? Very few of our service personnel were even involved. Those who were involved were at very low risk because Iran has basically no air defenses. And, submarines, stealth bombers, we're in good shape. Right. So, no one was injured on our side, and we did great damage to the bad guys. And now in Moscow and Beijing and Pyongyang, the other Axis powers are taking note, right, that the U.S. showed this resolve against one of the major Axis powers. And it's about time. I mean, We've been looking pretty weak out there with the way the administration has handled Russia, and now we look very strong. So a couple of notes. It's come up a couple of times among my friends and also out there on X. People have been asking, well, why couldn't Israel do this? Well, Israel doesn't have the GBU-57 MOP. It's not a weapon that they have. They do have some bunker busters, but nothing that could do damage to this type of facility. Only the U.S. has this capability. And my friends, this is a 30,000-pound bomb. It has to be dropped from high altitude in order to create the inertia and the effect so that it can hit the target. And when it did with a massive boom. Like, it was incredible. incredible to see the explosions at these sites as they were happening. Iranians, of course, taking video on the ground. But that's a big bomb. And, Israel has a number of great fighter planes, but like the F-35 has all of its weapons bays internal because it's a stealth plane, right? And if you're carrying all of your weapons internally, you only have so much space, and it couldn't carry a payload the size of the GBU-57 anyway. Israel's largest bomber is the F-15 I, Ra'am, the Thunder. That's what Ra means. And that's based on the F-15E Strike Eagle in the U.S. And this is a version, because the F-15 was, I hate to get too technical, but the F-15 was designed as an interceptor to shoot down other airplanes. And now it was modified to be able to do land attack, ground attack missions as well. That was the F-15E Strike Eagle. And that was modified for that. In any case, that can carry about 18,000 pounds of fuel and ordnance, right? So the F-15I couldn't carry this particular bomb. Really, the B-2 is the plane that can drop it. It's a huge internal weapons bay. It can carry this kind of payload, and it's stealth, right? So, it's very, very difficult to target and track and all that kind of stuff. So, this is why the U.S. has this kind of capability. And we used it. And I'd take a minute to say, so the B-2 is a really good 5th-gen bomber, but now we have the 6th-gen B-21 Raider coming soon too. So just imagine another generation stealthier plane that is going to come up and be even more even stealthier, even more high tech, able to be, do all this stuff where, all the sensors that, contribute to the battlefield, intelligence in real time and all that good stuff, the ability to receive new orders and targeting information en route. The B-2, if you want to communicate with the plane, you basically send them an email for all intents and purposes. And this would be a lot better than that. But the B-2 Spirit is still a great plane, and it was able to do great work. We had some take off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and head west over the Pacific, and that kind of distracted people while a number of others went east and hit their targets there. There was this to-do about bombers going to Diego Garcia Island in the Indian Ocean. That's great, but the way our bombers are set up, the B-2 can take off from Whiteman Air Force Base, and with the help of refueling planes, they can attack any target anywhere in the world in 24 hours, and actually a lot faster than that. While it is a subsonic plane, it flies at pretty good speed. So, they can get up there, get up to a decent altitude, cruise on over to the target. No one can see them, and it's brilliant. So let's talk about President Trump. So this was interesting. The president said, first of all, that he had given Iran 60 days. And on day 61, he's like, look, you guys didn't make a deal. I tried to make a deal. We're done here. And Israel was able to attack. That I'll be talking about here in a minute. But recently, as Israel destroyed the air defenses and they've been really cracking down on the Iranian regime, they've been doing great work over there. But again, Israel doesn't have the capabilities to destroy these nuclear facilities. So, President Trump started talking about it, and he said that the military had developed plans. Obviously, the Air Force, the Navy, we have contingencies, right? The military comes up with plans and presents the political leadership, the SecDef and the president, with options, right? And then they discuss those options. And the president said sometime, and then he'd make a decision in the next 2 weeks, right? So we got the plans, we got all that stuff, we're ready to go, and he just had to pull the trigger. All these people, is that the same thing as Trump telling, Putin he has 2 weeks and all this stuff? And I'm just like, people, if the president's going to bomb Iran, he's not exactly going to say, yeah, we're going to bomb them at 0400 local time. They're going to be coming in at course 070 from the Gulf near Bahrain, and they'll be flying at, 45,000 feet. Come on. It's like a scene out of Airplane, right? As we're flying low to fly under radar and all this kind of thing. When are you coming back? I can't tell you. That's classified. Come on. So anyway, it's just funny. Anyhow, people. So great leadership by the presidents. put all those silly people aside. They're silly. Great leadership on the part of the president. He's earned my vote many times over. I've had the honor of voting for the man 3 times for president, and I'm grateful that I did. I joked back in 2017 that he earned my vote in 2016 with his appointment of Neil Gorsuch to the court. I mean, just that alone was awesome, let alone all the other great things he's done. The Jerusalem embassy move, all this stuff. Just he's done a lot of great things. Today was a really awesome one. So let's real quick here. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you, U.S. Air Force, on behalf of the Jewish people. If I can make myself a spokesman for us as a people for a moment, I don't have such great ambitions, but thank you. I mean, we as a people have already been through one attempted genocide. We really don't need to live in constant fear that Iran could at any time launch missiles or have their proxies launch missiles with nuclear weapons at the state of Israel and annihilate half of us at a blow. So that is a really great thing. And of course, there were great reasons for the U.S. to attack. U.S. interests were threatened, which is what I'm going to talk about here next. But I guess we run the world anyway, so I like to joke about the elders of Zion and all this kind of thing. By the way, what do you think of our plan? The elders got together, we made all this. This is all part of the plan, right? Something like that. We the space lasers couldn't reach the nuclear facility, so we had to pull some strings and make our puppets do whatever they have to do. Anyway, so great work on the president's part. Now, why was this in the interests of the United States? I could go down the list of things that Iran has done to the U.S. President Trump listed off some of the most egregious ones. But, I mean, the hostages they took at the U.S. Embassy when they took over in Iran, the killing of Marines in Lebanon, the attacks on American soldiers. They made the IEDs and the weapons that killed a lot of American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. So many things, constant drum of attacks on our interests. And of course, on our allies in Israel and, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Syrian government, the Houthis, all of these things, Now, most of Iran's proxies are, nipped in the bud now, but, they've done a lot of these things. So Iran has been attacking the U.S. and committing terrorism all over the world for decades, and they are the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Now, recently, they've been working on this program to enrich uranium. Now, they say it's for civilian purposes, but you only have to enrich uranium to 5% for civilian purposes. Again, I don't want to get too technical. You have U-235, and there's a few atoms of U-238 in there. And, you run them in the centrifuges, spin them in the centrifuges, and what you get, eventually, you get enough of the 238 that it's enriched to a point where you can use it for nuclear fuel. But those fuel rods are like 5% enriched. They enrich to 60%. From 60%, from there to 90 is a downhill slope. It's much easier to make weapons-grade uranium once you've gotten to that point. So as Ryan Macbeth was noting in a recent video about nuclear programs, this kind of thing, he used M&Ms to demonstrate the 235, 238 thing with uranium. That was actually really funny. So go check that out on YouTube. Ryan Macbeth is hilarious. But as he points out, I mean, as much as, we like to celebrate Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project, the real story in World War II of nuclear development was at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where we had centrifuges that were enriching uranium. We had to enrich a lot of uranium to get the little boy bomb ready to go. And that bomb, they were so convinced it was going to work that they didn't even test it. It was the Fat Man bomb, the plutonium bomb that we had to test. Plutonium is, it's a little more powerful, a little easier to get the fission reaction, except that you have to implode it, which was the key issue there. But we made plutonium by running reactors in Washington. So, that there you go. Story of that. But the Iranians are making weapons-grade uranium. We know that. We know they wanted a bomb. Now, the Iranians also have a ballistic missile program. They have been developing missiles for years that could reach as far as Israel, of course. They have those. They developed another missile type that could reach Europe. They have those. They could bomb London right now. Like if it was some of their missiles, they don't have a lot of them, but they could fire a missile that could reach London, right? They are currently working on an intercontinental ballistic missile. like the sort that Russia, China, and North Korea have. ICBMs, and we obviously have them, but ICBMs are capable of reaching targets anywhere in the world, or over very long range, let's just say. There's only one reason the Iranians would want to have both nuclear, enriched uranium to weapons grade levels, the atomic bomb, basically, on the one hand, and an ICBM on the other. And that is to put the two together and have missiles on the ground that could threaten the lives of tens of millions of Americans from afar. That's what they want to do. That is a huge threat to us. They're already, because they already have missiles that can reach Europe, a huge threat to our European allies, our allies in Israel, and our allies in the Arab world. So they're already a huge problem with that. So we couldn't allow that. For once, we have finally stopped a nuclear power from, a bad actor from becoming a nuclear power. We didn't stop North Korea, and that's unfortunate. As much as the North Koreans like to pretend that they're crazy in order to get attention, the fact is they're not as crazy as the Iranians. The Iranians are really psychotic. They had plans. We know they were developing plans to give nuclear weapons to their proxies. I mean, just imagine wouldn't it be wonderful to have the Houthis armed with nuclear weapons? Hezbollah. I mean, oh my God. And that creates that nightmare scenario where one of them could launch a weapon against Israel, and then there'd be that, the Iran could go to the international community and, well, we didn't drop a bomb. It was our proxies. Come on. We know better than that. We won't have to find out now. Because that's been done. So great move by the president. That protects American security, right? And American interests. And President Trump just made sure that you can tuck your children in at night, or your grandchildren, whatever the case may be, in safely, knowing that there's one fewer nuclear threat out there who wants to kill you with the capability to do so, right? We're talking about building the Golden Dome, but I mean, we have some missiles that could help against North Korea, maybe, but we really don't have defenses against anything else. And fired from the direction of Iran, we don't have any missile defense on that side of the country. So that would be a huge problem. But we won't have to worry about that now. Their nuclear facilities have been destroyed. Damage assessments suggest that Fordow is unusable. And Natanz as well. We may have to do a second strike on some of their facilities. There's some back and forth on that. Obviously, the Israelis are going to maintain air supremacy, so we'll go from there. So there you go. That's a beautiful thing, and just a great operation. Great news. Exciting news. We finally got one of the bad guys, right? So from here, I'm going to talk about the Israeli campaign and do some analysis of that. And then, of course, I'll conclude this episode by talking a little bit about, what would it look like, a world without the Ayatollahs, without the fanatical theocratic regime in Iran? You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics with Isaac Kite. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. Now you're messing with the son of a mensch. All right, so let's talk about Israel's campaign against Iran. Holy mackerel, what an event. So we had Trump gave them 60 days. As we got close to the 61st day, I posted my last episode just before that, and I asked this question, right? Are the U.S. and Israel preparing to attack Iran? Well, the U.S. was preparing for trouble in the region, clearly. We're evacuating the non-essential personnel and what have you from embassies and positions and bases out there. But at the same time, it was Israel that was gearing up for an attack. Now, what's kind of interesting, the Iranians have been lulled into a sense of false confidence, right? False security by a very clever campaign where Bibi had one of the parties, the religious parties in the coalition, act like they were about to pull out of the coalition, and there would be new elections, and there was all this, purported chaos in Israel, right? Like we were gonna, we couldn't get our act together on our side, and everything was falling apart for us, and then, that lulled the, the mullahs into thinking that they were safe, and then Israel launched the attack. A couple of interesting things. So first of all, apparently Israel had a drone base inside Iran, which is beautiful. Just like the Ukrainians have been able to get drones into containers to attack Russian air bases and trains and this kind of thing, which is beautiful. But Israel was able to have a base inside of Iran with drones. Just unbelievable. I mean, just wow. The Mossad can do so many wonderful things. In addition to this, the Iranian Air Force Command, their entire Air Force Command, was lured into a meeting by fake phone calls. So they received these calls that seemed purported to be legit. They called them to a meeting. They all show up for the meeting, and they must have been looking around at each other like, "What are we doing here? Who called the meeting? Ahmed, did you call? No, Salim, did you call the meeting? No, no." And then all of a sudden, boom. The Israelis lured these guys to a fake meeting and blew them all up in one attack. And in addition to hitting a bunch of other major military commanders and Iranian Guards commanders, the IRGC is, it's a terrorist organization. It's a paramilitary group that keeps the government in power. And it was just incredible. And of course, a number of scientists. Since then, Mossad agents have been going down on the ground and have been attacking scientists and political figures. It turns out that Ahmadinejad, the former president who annoyed us so much when he was in office, that he was killed on the street, in his car. So there you go. And they've been able to go and do all of this stuff. So apparently they had some good resources there in country, and knew where a lot of the military infrastructure was. Of course, the Israeli Air Force went and neutralized what remaining air defense Iran had. Of course, in the last round of attacks, Israel destroyed their air defenses and left Iran wide open. There were no air defenses in Iraq, no air defenses in Iran. They were able to get some air defenses back from Russia and all that, but those were gone pretty quickly too. Apparently, one of the first targets of the drones that were hidden in Iran were the air defenses, for obvious reasons. So Israel has taken no losses. But the Iranians have shared all of these video game footage and all of this AI and all this stuff, claiming that an F-35 was shot down or an F-16 or all this kind of nonsense. They claim to have an Israeli pilot that they captured, all kinds of nonsense. None of it being remotely true. So, an incredible campaign. Israel has attacked a number of the refineries that make gas in Iran. But here's an interesting thing. The Israelis have carefully and studiously avoided attacking Iran's oil export facilities, trying not to shock the world too much. And oil prices have risen quite a bit. But if Israel does that, first of all, the rise in oil prices and the shock to the oil market would not be a good thing overall. And it would mean that Russia would make more money on its oil, which it is, unfortunately. But, we want that to calm down very quickly and the prices to get back to normal. Destroying Iran's ability to export would not help with that. Also, you've heard all these people from, politically irrelevant people like Steve Bannon going around saying, well, the Iranians are going to block the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow strait that grants access to the Arabian Gulf. And yes, if you sank a ship there, like when the Evergreen got stuck and anyway, got stuck in the Suez Canal, that was a big problem for shipping. Not as much anymore because of the Houthis. Now everybody's going around Africa. But the fact is, a sinking of a ship there would be a big problem. However, that would also mean that the Iranians would be barred from exporting their oil. And at that point, we would have no reason not to attack their oil exports. So playing a careful game here, the Israelis know that as long as there is the possibility that they can export oil, they won't try to block the Strait of Hormuz. Did have a collision and some fires on ships outside the strait, which had nothing to do with the conflict. Unfortunately, collisions are happening out there now. A lot of the crews are tired and exhausted, and they're hitting things. Their ships are on like an autopilot, right? And so they're running into each other at a rate that's ridiculous. I mean, we need some improvements in the maritime industry. So, in any event, very carefully thought out attacks. So, brilliantly led campaign, and of course, the main targets are the Iranian leadership and their nuclear scientists. So, with this, obviously, the Iranians have started shooting back. Now, it's very important to note that Israel is not attacking the people of Iran. We want the people of Iran to rise up against their government. And so, when Israel is attacking Iran, Iranian civilians are out poking their heads out their windows and trying to take pictures and this kind of thing because they know they're not the target. Meanwhile, Iran's response to Israel has not had the same discretion. They've fired almost exclusively at civilian targets, especially downtown Tel Aviv. We've had something like 30 impacts so far. There was some damage tonight as Iran fired back. A lot of their launchers and a lot of their missile capabilities have been destroyed. So the number of launches has been declining rapidly. They fired a few hypersonic missiles apparently as well. So we've had some terrible damage. A number of children have been killed. Whole families have been attacked and killed, including a Christian family, including a number of Israeli Arabs. And even a mosque was hit. And of course, the other day, they hit a hospital. The Iranians are the kind of people that bomb a hospital deliberately. Israel has to bomb bases that are under hospitals because that's where Hamas and Iran and other people hide their military bases and bunkers and that kind of thing. And their headquarters for Hamas for a lot of years was under a bunker, under a bunker under a hospital. So it's been unfortunate, but we've had to attack under those, but the hospital is never the target. And Israel always calls ahead of time and tells people to leave. In fact, the Israelis told civilians to get away from various factories and military plants in Iran just the other day and to clear out the center of Tehran. And a large number of people have been leaving Tehran. So we warned civilians and let them leave. The Iranians fire missiles at civilians, including cluster munitions, which the Russians have launched against Ukrainians too. That's an entirely and utterly despicable weapon to use against civilians, whether it's Russia or Iran. The Axis powers have no morality. These cluster munitions are sick weapons. They're, when used against foreign troops, they're effective. Okay, armies shoot at armies. Whether it's a bullet, a cluster munition, a missile, or a bomb, that's a weapon. I want to say, as the old saying goes, all's fair in love and war. But against civilian targets, I mean, what kind of coward, what kind of anyway, you have to be a real a-hole to shoot cluster munitions at civilians. And so it's sickening. But Israeli air defenses have worked on the whole. So far, none of the drones have gotten through, which I think is rather remarkable because the drones are the new tech. They're the disruptor in military technology right now, and they're really dangerous. These Shahed drones, they're cheap, as I've talked about before. They're cheap, they're pre-programmed, and they just go out and fly. They're basically dumb bombs after that. They go out and fly their mission and onto their targets, and none of them have gotten through. So it shows that the defenses against those are really working. The Arrow missile has shot down a number of Iranian ballistic missiles up in space, so we have more space combat. The THAAD battery, the U.S. has a THAAD battery in Israel that is helping to defend. So we're getting, great practice and learning, doing a lot of learning on how to shoot down these missiles. But unfortunately, a small percentage get through. And at this point, I think the shoot down rate is something like 97%. But it's heartbreaking, the hits that happen. It's wrenching, but that's why they do it. They do it because they know we love life and that we value life. We think life is sacred. We believe it because that's what Hashem told us, what God told us to believe, to understand. And so they love killing children and civilians because they know it hurts. But hopefully that regime won't be around much longer to keep doing that. So we'll keep up the pressure. Now that the U.S. has attacked and the nuclear facilities are no longer at issue, Israel can keep up the pressure toward regime change, which should be the ultimate goal here. Theoretically, unfortunately, all of these nuclear facilities and sites could be rebuilt, right? There's no reason the Iranians couldn't, given the time and opportunity, start over again from scratch and get right back here, in time. And they will, because they're fanatics. They want what they want. The Nazis, the Japanese Empire, they weren't going to stop until someone stopped them. And it's the same thing with the Iranians. And I do get frustrated when we get over here, the narcissism of people, well, we've done this or we've done that, and we should leave the Iranians alone. Look, folks, no matter what you do or we've done as a country, or what mistakes we may or may not have made, these people are bad guys. They're not bad guys because of anything we did. They are just bad guys, and they want us dead. All right. That's just how it is. All right. We didn't make Vladimir Putin a psychopath. He is a psychopath. We didn't make the Ayatollahs a crazy regime, bent on mass murder and committing another Holocaust and all this kind of stuff. That's just who they are. They made those decisions. Now we have to punish them for it and defeat them so that they cannot hurt anyone else. So we'll keep the pressure on for that. So when I get back from the break, we'll talk about the the efforts to replace the Iranian regime and the prospects for that. I don't want to sound over optimistic. Unfortunately, this regime has a lot of staying power. They've survived calamities before, but let's talk about that and see where that goes. Right quick before I go into what could the world look like without the Ayatollahs, I do want to take just a minute. I can't help myself, but I have to talk a little bit about American politics. First of all, Trump's approval rating is up. Depending on whom you ask, it's somewhere between like 52 and 55%. RMG and Rasmussen have it up like that. Now, a lot of your traditional pollsters that get things wrong and overpoll Democrats have him in the red or down, but that's how they do things. They do that deliberately, right? But overall, the best news polling wise is that almost 80% of Americans don't want Iran to have nukes. Now, when you ask people, should we bomb Iran? Obviously, a majority of Americans answered several pollsters saying no, but that's why we elected President Trump, to make those decisions. And the fact is, the bombing comes at very little risk to us. And there's another time, well, Iran could retaliate. American air defenses and our bases in the region are fully stocked. They have not been tested as yet. Or in other words, they haven't been attacked. They haven't spent any ammunition or munitions on it. And the Iranians know if they do that, Trump will rain fire on them. We have several aircraft carrier battle groups in the region right now. We're going to come down on them like a ton of bricks. Perhaps the saddest thing I have seen is that when asked, only 23% of Americans, statistically speaking, on average, those asked, only 23% of Americans could point to Iran on the map. Now, you've had Eamon's Minute. You've heard that, Eamon not only knows his geography, but my son also knows, his flags. So, you can describe any flag to him of a country and he'll know it, unless it's some small Pacific island or something. He even knows most of the state flags. So, we're geeks. We know a lot of things. So my boy knows where Iran is and can point to it on the map. But 23% of Americans can, most can't. And that just, so like when you see a poll where, majority don't support it, bombing Iran, I don't think a majority of Americans really understand what's going on over there and understand the threat that is posed. And the media doesn't tell anybody or educate anybody. If you go to X, you can find out. So, you have to take these with a grain of salt, so that's something to consider. So that's just a few thoughts on American politics there. But with the way that Trump responded to the riots and all that nonsense and the attack in Iran, his popularity's up. And obviously the economy is getting stronger. So the news is really good for the GOP. Not so good for the opponents. And, they started this like No Kings protest and all this stuff, trying to get that going nationally. And that was supposed to be more of it this weekend, and nothing. Like the whole thing just, petered out. There isn't any real, substantial will to protest unless people are paid to riot and paid to protest. There's nothing to protest. And as for the no kings thing, talking about the most successful protest in history. I mean, we haven't had a king since 1776, and we're not going to have a king. So we have no kings. It's it's ridiculous. So there's that. All right. So I've mentioned before that the Iranian regime, as I've talked about it over the years in the podcast, they have survived a lot of protests and a lot of uprisings. And, they killed Masa Amini, beat her to death for showing her hair, and they throw poison at, acid at women and who lose their, many of whom have lost an eye or both eyes or blinded by it because they show their hair. I mean, just nasty people living in Iran, and the religious police. The supporters of this regime are really horrible. While there's a large group of people who oppose them, they do have many supporters, especially out in the rural area. But they've survived a lot of uprisings and a lot of trouble and a lot of protests because they have the perception of strength. They have bombs and planes and tanks and are developing nuclear weapons, and they make themselves look strong. Well, right now they're looking pretty weak, and they grow weaker by the day. So it's entirely possible as their weakness increases that people there will perceive their opportunity to rise up and overthrow them. What could that look like? It's it's tricky. Let's say that. Perhaps the most plausible scenario, I think, is that some mid-level officer in the military, and you have to remember that the Iranian army and the Republican Guards Corps, the IRGC, the pseudo, the paramilitary pseudo soldiers who are the terrorists, really the ones who prop up the regime, they're separate from the military. And while the military is loyal to the government, how loyal is always in question, But if someone in the military, maybe a colonel, maybe a brigadier general, someone with some rank, but maybe not, up with the regime, who isn't benefiting from all of the corruption and all of that stuff at the top, right? If someone like that took a look around right now and said to themselves, the Ayatollah and all their people are in charge and they get all the goodies, but that could be me. I could be in charge. I could be the big hero of who brought down the regime and turned things back over to the Iranian people and all this kind of thing. That could happen. And if they had enough support from other low-level officers in the military and some of the civil service, which wouldn't be too difficult, presumably there are some mid-level civil servants who are, likewise like, hey, I could be a bigger person. If they got together and were able to organize a real putsch against the regime, in theory, they could conceivably defeat the IRGC and take power. And obviously they would have the support and help of the West, theoretically, the US and Israel in doing so, right? I do worry that, Iranians are very patriotic people. And while, Israel doesn't want to have to be bombing them because, if they hadn't tried to develop nukes or attacked Israel, we wouldn't be bombing them because that's not what we're about. If it hadn't been for October 7th, none of this would be happening. Although as the Iranians get closer and closer to having a nuclear weapon, that would have created a crisis right there. But in any event, they brought this on themselves. They attacked Israel. Now we're defending ourselves. The Israelis are defending themselves, and America is defending ourselves. Anyway, we're on the defensive here, ultimately. But if that could happen, they could conceivably push the regime out of power. Now, Reza Pahlavi, who's the son of the last Shah who ruled in Iran, who was overthrown in 1979, is still alive. I do want to make a couple of points. So there are a lot of people who remain in the West, who live in the West, who remain loyal to the old Shah. He's taken on a little bit more. I want to say some people look at him with more rose-colored glasses after the fact because of what happened in Iran after his exile. But that was a repressive regime. It was modern, but let's face it. I mean, that was a tyranny too, right? His son is much more Western and much more, westernized, freedom, democracy, and all that. But it's not clear to what extent the reputation in Iran would be, or whether he would be accepted coming back and that kind of thing. However, he is a figure with historical ties to the ancien regime who could lead an interim government. So right now, members of Congress, a number of world leaders are talking to Reza Pahlavi about potentially having a role in a transition. And what we're really talking about here is him serving as maybe like an interim president for a government that's transitioning from the Ayatollahs to free, fair elections. And he could do that. And maybe after those elections, if they write a constitution, perhaps they'd choose like a parliamentary democracy. Then he could serve as like a ceremonial president, head of state for a couple of terms or something like that. But the return of the monarchy is probably not a good idea. At this point, the Iranians had the Shahs, and then they had the Ayatollahs, and it's like, these unelected people running the country. I just don't see that being the direction they want to go. If this regime comes down, a parliamentary democracy, a republic, is most likely what's going to follow it. And I'm sure Reza Pahlavi would be happy to participate in it. But it would mean his family could theoretically go home. They could be wealthy mahars in Iran thereafter and have power and wealth and influence and all this good stuff. And they could then, be they could be important people, kind of like, the Kennedys here, most of whom I'm not that fond of. Obviously, RFK Jr. is in the administration, but for hopefully they'd be a better influence on Iran that way. But talk of him returning and taking up his job as Shah and restoring the monarchy and all that kind of stuff, probably not. But in any case, it's being talked about. So we have an interim government that the international community will respect. We have that's being put together. All we need is for the people of Iran and some of its institutions to rise up against the government. And then we go from there. Once that happens, let's just for a moment, let's take our imaginations. When Iran changes parties, changes hands, and the government is a new government that's going to cooperate with the West, the Houthis will have no more weapons. Hamas, no more money. Hezbollah, no more money. They're already cut off from Syria and kind of pinned down, right? They're going to shrivel up because without money and resources, those organizations can't really function. They can't really do what they're intended to do. Not to mention that a lot of their top leadership's been destroyed, and without leadership from Iran, they can't reorganize, or it's going to be more difficult to reorganize. Let's put it that way. So those movements will shrivel up. The Houthis will very quickly be beset. As their weapons run out, their supplies and money that they're getting from Iran, they'll be, quickly under attack by the Yemeni government and, the Western-backed government there, and probably have to make some kind of peace deal to restore order. Otherwise, they face total defeat. And when Trump says make a deal, make a deal. You don't wait for him to bomb you. You know what I mean? If you're the bad guys, by God, make a deal, right? So there's that. But I mean, think about that. A world without the largest state sponsor of terrorism. It would be beautiful. And for once, as horrible as October 7th was, Israelis could live in peace, right? And without all that money coming in, there'd be the possibility of trying to build something better with the Palestinians, like I've talked about. That you'd need a generation to change before they could talk about statehood or anything like that. You'd need an end to the racism and all that. Who knows what's possible? But it starts with Iran. You have to cut out the cancer first before you can heal. Let's put it that way. We need to get the Iranian money out of the situation. So just take that moment to think. The Middle East will be so much more peaceful. Arabs and Israel the Arab governments have already kind of got a rapprochement, the Abraham Accords. The Saudis are kind of working with us now. There'll be greater peace in the Middle East. There'll be order and stability. Basically, we could turn the whole sandbox into, I want to say a stable, settled, civilized place. There'd still be some terrorists here and there, and you've still got this guy Shara in Iran, in Syria, that he's not a great guy, former Al Qaeda, leading the country, but it would be a more stable place. And who knows? Maybe the Middle East could be a more prosperous place without all this war and conflict. It'd be a beautiful thing. It just requires people to take that leap of faith and get rid of this cancerous regime in Iran. So there you have it. What's the likelihood? If I were a betting man, I wouldn't bet a lot of money on the regime collapsing. Israel can keep the pressure on them for a while. If they attack the U.S., they're going to be under a lot more pressure. I just don't know that they'll do that. They always do this, like, they try to save face by hitting back and acting like they're all big and bad. But right now, I think they understand the weak position that they're in, and they can't even handle Israel bringing the U.S. into this war more so than we're already involved is probably not a smart move. So, but it's a fanatical regime. Who knows? Maybe they think that they're bringing on the apocalypse, and the 13th Imam will show up, and they'll go take over the world. That's it's really dangerous when you have countries led by people who believe stuff like this. It's terrible. Anyway, but that's you guys up to date. I'm going to probably record a walking video tomorrow and talk about it as well. And you can look for that on X and also on YouTube. So there you go. So I will say, as always, goodbye, Lahitrot.